The purpose of writing. Wait, I thought this was reading class, Mr. McGee. Why are we talking about writing? Well, writing comes out of reading. In order to be a great writer, you need to be a great reader. We learn from other writers. We learn what we like to read and what we want to read more of. That's why you walk into Barnes& Noble and see thousands of books, because everybody wants to read something exciting, and they feel they can write it. You will too, because we are the dreamers of dreams, just like Willy Wonka. Watch the following song, Pure Imagination, from the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and listen to the lyrics and understand that, like an author, Willy Wonka created a whole new world and experience and invited people in to share with them the happiness, the joy, the sorrow, but most of all, the adventure, the unknown. So, now you have to deal with a little bit of housekeeping. This is what the unit's going to look like. First, we're going to talk about author's perspective, and then we're going to look at context clues. We'll talk about author's purpose and why they specifically wrote this piece. Then we're going to talk about tone and mood and how it affects the story. Then we're going to discuss autobiographical narratives. And then finally, and importantly, we're going to talk about how to be a critical reader when you're going into an essay. Pure imagination. The photo that you see is Richard Burke. He's the author that introduces our textbook. He says that when he was a kid, he needed reading to be real. So he read a lot of nonfiction books. He loved it because he could go to the places that he read about. He could visit Mark Twain's house, Mark Twain's boat. He could visit places that were real to him. And then he picked up Mark Twain's Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and realized that fiction, just like nonfiction, could take him anywhere he wanted. It didn't even have to be real, and he didn't even have to leave his living room. That's why Richard Peck went to write fiction. He writes some nonfiction, but we're going to read one of his fiction stories in a little bit. Now, I want you to think, why do you read stories? And then I want you to think, what makes you tell stories? The answers are going to be quite different. I want you to come into class with your answers, and we'll look at how you read, or why you read, and how you tell stories. Now it's note-taking time. Just like learning how to play basketball, we gotta go to practice. This is our reading practice. The elements and types of fiction and nonfiction. First, fiction has fictional characters, made-up people. It also has a made-up plot, events in the story that push it along, leading us to a climax and a resolution. Next, every fictional story has a setting. It may or may not be real, but most of all, it includes where and when. It's important to have where and when in your setting, because you could write a story about America and it would be a completely different story if it was set in 1776 or 3076 in the future. Next, every fictional story has a narrator, someone who's telling you, the reader, the story. The narrator also has a point of view. It could be first person or third person. If it's first person, you'll notice that it has pronouns like I and me and we and us. But really, the most important thing you need to know is that it is an involved narrator. Think, for example, of The Outsiders. Ponyboy, our narrator, is involved in the story. Very much so, too. A third-person narrator is going to be uninvolved. We'd notice this by pronouns like he, she, it, they, them. But again, uninvolved is the most important key I want you to take away from this. Think about Harry Potter. Harry Potter is being told by a third-person narrator who is not involved in the story. They're just chronicling the story as it goes on. Finally, but definitely not least of all, a story that is fiction has a theme or a message. This is a lesson to be learned, an idea the character finds on his way through the story, but most of all, it has to be something that can be stated in a sentence. The topic baseball is not a theme. The topic love is not a theme. It would have to be baseball brings us closer together, or love conquers all. Those are themes that can be written on. Next, we'll look at types of fiction. In 6th grade, we talked about a lot of types of fiction, very broad. Now, we're going to narrow it down to 3 specific types. The first are novels. Novels, which are usually considered 30,000 words or more, often contain subplots. These are plots of the stories, oftentimes taken on by supporting characters that don't directly affect the climax of the story. Next are novellas. These are stories that are longer than a short story, but less than 30,000 words. Finally, we have short stories. Short stories are stories that can be read in one sitting. A long short story might be read in a day, usually around like 20, 25 pages or more, and a traditional short story could be read before dinner after you get home from school. Usually 1 page, 3 pages, 5 pages. They're very short, but it's important to know that all of these types of fiction have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now we're going to talk about the elements of nonfiction. Very different than fiction, nonfiction deals with real people, events, or ideas. It also has only the point of view of the author. This is different than the point of view of the narrator because the author is a real person who is trying to present facts or discuss ideas. They can't present facts and opinions. If they're writing a nonfiction piece, it's important that they present the facts unbiased. It also may reflect a historical context, including references to major social or cultural information. Now, what does that mean? It means, in less fancy-schmancy language, the historical context just tells us what's going on at the time that they're writing about. So if somebody's writing about the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, it's important to know that the American Revolution is going on during his life. It affected him. The types of nonfiction that we're going to look at this year are going to be a biography, which, as we learned last year, is a story the author writes about somebody else. Then we have autobiography or memoir, which are stories that the author writes about themselves. The difference is a memoir is going to be usually told in a narrative form. Autobiography is more facts and straightforward plot, while a memoir embellishes, has character detail, vivid descriptions, and all things that would make it a very interesting story. The next are letters, which we are very acquainted with. This could include emails, letters of thank you, letters of note, and also journals and diaries. If you have a journal or a diary, you are a nonfiction writer. Think about it. You don't write about what didn't happen in the day. It's your own personal account, so you're not going to make anything up. You may present an opinion or two, but you are going to present your side of the argument. You might even give a historical context or two. What was going on in the world that day? You could write an essay or article. These are the nonfiction texts that are going to discuss ideas. These are where you can present your opinion and not get in trouble for it. You can also write informational texts, like our textbook. Think about it. It had to be written by somebody, so that person was the author of the non-fictional text, our textbook. Okay, we're going to read two stories, one fiction and one nonfiction, that deal with similar issues in history. The fictional text is going to be called The 3th-Century Woman by Richard Peck, and this will be found on page 7. The nonfiction text is called The Fall of the Hindenburg, and this will be found on page 17. I'd like you to read this for homework and be prepared to discuss this in class. So for homework, read those texts and be prepared to discuss them in class as small groups and then as a whole class. I want you to be prepared to discuss how the elements of fiction and nonfiction can be found in each story. I also want you to brainstorm on paper, so bring the paper to class, about a historical event that has occurred in your life that you would like to write a short story or expository on. If you have any questions, you can email me through the school's website or contact me via the wiki. As always, have a great night and keep working hard.